So a couple of things to note. One is I'm going to be using Slido in this presentation just for 3 poll questions. The other thing to note is that I'm not going to be sharing my screen. As you're seeing, I have a new tool. It's a really weird tool. It's called And Raquel, I gave her the link to post it in there so that this is just a new way of presenting. I can now be my own weather woman and post in here. So if you want to see the slides, you'll have to make me big, but you can choose your own view. So the gallery view or speaker view, and you can choose your own view. So that'll be this. I think it's a fun app. Again, I'm Lisette and I run Collaboration Superpowers, and I'm super excited to be here today to share some of the challenges that I'm seeing remote companies having right now, or all companies right now, and how they're navigating this new remote normal, whatever we want to call this, right? So as we know, COVID-19 sent everybody home to work, and there were a lot of remote doubters that saw that when absolutely necessary, it was actually possible to work together anywhere. It was, however, a rough ride, as we all discovered that working at home during a pandemic is not the usual way of remote working. And even seasoned remote workers were really struggling and having significant stress and disruption because of, working at home with families, the online schooling, navigating all the rules of lockdown, and just figuring out how all the tech works. There's been a lot of fodder for a bumpy ride, but many of us did it. And in the process, we realized that working remote was not only just possible, but in some instances, it was actually preferable. So now, some people don't want to go back to the office, even when it's safe to do so. They don't miss the commute, they don't miss the office politics, and they're more productive at home. They like the freedom that remote offers. So what I'd like to know from you guys is, when it's safe to do so, do you want to go back to the office 100%, work remote 100%, go hybrid where some days are at the office and some days are remote, or maybe something else? And go ahead and add that to the chat. But if you want to go to slido.com, I'm going to show the results here in real time. We've only got 6 people responding, 7, so it's not super accurate yet. Yep, there's some people that want to be more in the office. Indeed, my husband hates with all capital letters and exclamation points, he hates working from home. And I, of course, have the opposite effect with the office. I just hate working from an office. I like my freedom. But let's see what people want here. So far, with 30 people answering, we have about 85% who want to be hybrid, and 9% who want to do 10% who want to work remote 100% of the time, 5% that want to go back to the office 100% of the time. So these results, these are not unusual across the world. I've been giving this presentation all over the place, and what I can tell you is that most people don't want to leave the office behind entirely. Oops, and I need to switch where I'm going. Most people don't want to leave the office behind entirely. Most people want some sort of a hybrid scenario where we work some days at the office and some days at home. And I think that in the end, what most people want is the freedom to choose when and where they're most productive. So all over social media, I'm hearing, the future of work is remote, it's remote. And I think, actually, I really believe the future of work is choice, the ability to choose when and where we're most productive. But that choice is not just limited to the individual. That choice is also for the companies. And companies get to choose as well where on the scale of remote that they want to be. So this is a scale that I took from Buffer, and there's a number of them out there. Matt Mullenweg has the remote maturity model that he talks about. Also an excellent interview with Sam Harris, if you haven't heard it yet, just one of the best I've ever heard. And this scale goes all the way from, you want to be on the left here, office-based, or you can go all the way to having distributed teams with digital nomads. So that's people in many time zones, and there's people moving around. So there's this whole scale of how remote companies actually want to be. And regardless of where you are on the scale as a company, what I always promote is that you want to be remote first, so that when something happens, that you have the ability to work from anywhere in case you need to. And in the past, I always used examples like the plumber or your kids are sick at home. I never really envisioned a global pandemic, but here we are. And now is the time to set up your companies for remote. All of the information that I'm going to be giving in today's talks come from the over 200 interviews that I've done on the Collaboration Superpowers podcast. They're all available for free on the website. And the book that was published a couple of years ago was just republished by Wiley in June. So if you want to get a copy of the book, that's also available. All those tips are available there. And the thing that I learned from all the interviews that I did is that there's no one right way to work remotely, sadly, because I would love to sell the silver bullet formula that gives everybody the success formula, but sadly there's no one right way. What works for one team isn't necessarily going to work for the other team. It's a series of experimenting to see what works for you. But when we get it right, the payoff is huge. We as individuals, we get the freedom to work when and where we're most productive. So we can train for a marathon or simply avoid the commute or just design our own workspaces. And companies get a stronger and more connected workforce where location is not the only variable that's holding us together. So while I said there is no one right way, I feel like there are these three areas where when we focus on these areas, we can increase the likelihood of remote success. And those areas are defining what normal behavior is, modifying how we communicate with each other, and then exploring new ways of being present. So before we get into this, I just want to say that I can see that there's chat going everywhere, but I've closed it because it totally distracts me. But so at the end, I'll look at the chat, and I've told Raquel if there's any burning questions, just to interrupt me, but just to note. So chat away, I just can't see it because it just totally distracts me. So let's start with defining what is normal and expected behavior. So pretty simple concept, actually. When we work together in the same place, we can see what people are working on, right? We tend to have an understanding of each other's behavior because we can easily see what people are doing and make inferences. And when we go remote, we have to make our behaviors more explicit so that there's less room for confusion. And I like the analogy of you wouldn't just get a sports team together or an orchestra together and say like, okay, go play. The same is true for a team. We shouldn't get them together and say, okay, go work. First, we should create a team agreement, define what is normal, and then tune our team by collectively creating this. So essentially, team agreements, they provide the glue that helps bind everyone together. We talk about the kinds of information we need to share, the security protocols that go along with that, how we're going to communicate with each other, and how do we know what each other are doing. And this team agreement really gets rid of a lot of miscommunications because it gives team members a platform for discussing their assumptions, and that's really important. One really easy place to start is just to agree on the tools that you're going to use. I interviewed Beat Buhlmann from Evernote a while ago, and he said in his interview, he said, yeah, you would never email the fire department if your house is on fire, right? Like that's not the right tool for that situation. And in remote work, it's also something there. Like you've got to define when do you send an email, when are you going to use WhatsApp, when are you using Slack or Teams or whatever. There's so many ways to communicate. It's really good just to outline how we're going to do that. The other thing in terms of even just setting team agreements is to define what your expectations are. With remote, we move from time-based work to results-based work. And so we need to redefine what does success look like? What are those results for the team so that everybody's really clear what success looks like. And I love this quote by a company called 10up. They say that any business that effectively measures employee productivity surely isn't relying on anything having to do with physical location. When we go remote, we're forced to measure productivity by far more objective metrics than things like time in the building. So I really like that quote because it really hits home as to what we need to measure. So I'm going to do an experiment here. We're going to go to the next poll question, and let me activate it. So I'd like to know how many people have some sort of a team agreement in place. Now, I don't mean just a verbal team agreement. I mean some sort of a written team agreement in place. In the past, this number has been about 20% of the teams have something in place. And since COVID hit, that number has gone to about 50-50. So I'm really curious to see in this community how many people here have some sort of a team agreement in place. So let me switch to the results again and we'll see what people have. So again, it's about, well, it's changing fast as people put in their answers, but we're getting there. So there's some other, I'll read the chat in a bit to hear what the others are. All right, so you can see the split is still 50-50. There's still a large percentage of teams out there that don't have a team agreement in place. I know that companies usually try to impose some sort of agreement, but I really encourage teams to, within the confines of whatever restrictions your company has, I know you're not allowed to use lots of tools and all these kinds of things, but within the confines of that, how can you agree as a team on how to work together? So one last thing to say about team agreements is I do have a number of free templates available on the Collaboration Superpowers website. So if you want to create one or you need to recreate one, just know that just go and you can download your free templates there. So I'd like to move on from defining normal and expected behavior to modifying how we communicate with each other. So when the lockdown started, most companies tried to mimic the office online somehow. And what it resulted in was endless online meetings, right? All of a sudden we started hearing more about Zoom fatigue. My neighbors were complaining about 3-hour conference calls that they're sitting through without a break. It just turned into endless online meetings. So I want you to know there is a way to stop that. But before we do that, the last poll question, I'd like to just ask, on average, about how many hours per week are you spending in meetings? Is it 1 to 2 hours, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 20? Have you lost track completely? Is it all just one big blur? So let me go ahead and show the results. Oh my God, this is terrible. 20 plus hours a week. It's a lot of meetings. It's really a lot of meetings. All right, I'm so sorry. I'm hoping the next tips will help you. All right, there's a lot of people in meetings all week long, indeed. Okay, I'm hopefully gonna give you some tips on how to fix that. Some things, as we're all realizing, like meetings and just some of the things that we do in person, they don't translate well online. And what I'm really hoping that people start to realize is that remote working is a different medium. And I like to make the analogy between radio and television. They both broadcast information, but you need to design the content for each of those broadcast mediums in different ways. So with remote, there are different ways to express ourselves. There are different ways of showing appreciation or giving feedback. Building trust is done differently. And one of the keys to this new medium of work is being more conscientious about how we use our time. One really easy place to start is to shorten all of our meetings and give ourselves a break in between meetings. So if your meeting is 1 hour, shorten it to 45 minutes if you can. Take a 15-minute break before the next one starts. If your meeting is longer than 45 minutes, science shows that we definitely should take a break. So I'm encouraging 5 to 10-minute breaks in the middle where you get up from your computer and do something not screen related. So that's a super easy place to start. The next step is then to evaluate, do you even need that meeting to begin with? Or can the conversation be done asynchronously somehow? So for example, if it's a status update, maybe it can be posted in a Slack channel or in a tool like I've Done This or Jira. For presentations, if you were going to come to a meeting and just give a presentation, maybe consider recording a video and sending it before participants to watch before the presentation starts. Or instead of brainstorming together on a call, maybe getting people together around an online whiteboard before the call to give everybody a chance to think on their own time. When we get better at asynchronous communication, it means less interruptions and more control over our workday. It also, as a team, gives everyone time to process and reply to information instead of going with that knee-jerk decision that often gets made in time-boxed meetings. So the thing to note, I have this little yin-yang symbol under the question mark. What's really important about asynchronous is that the yin-yang of asynchronous versus synchronous work is really going to be different for every company. And the key question to ask is, what do we need to discuss together online? And how can we use our time together online wisely and minimize the number of synchronous meetings that we need? So the key is, 1, reduce the number of meetings you need and improve the meetings that you have. So we just talked about how to reduce the number of meetings we need. We go asynchronous, we make them shorter, we take more breaks. And now I want to just touch on how do we improve the meetings that we're having. So one of my favorite quotes from the interviews that I did is from Agile Bill Krebs. And he said, people think that they want to be co-located, but what we really want is high bandwidth communication. We want it to be easy to communicate with our remote colleagues, like Star Trek, right? You just push the button and it's Lisette to bridge, report. And from anywhere on the ship, there's reporting. It's just, then there's no screaming children or coffee shop sounds. It's just crystal clear communication. That's what we really want. Now, with minimal effort, we should be able to just hear and see each other when needed. That's what I think Star Trek, you want to push the button. And at the office, we want to be able to just walk down the hall to someone's office and ask a question. Online, we always have to schedule a meeting, but we need to be able, what's good is you want to be able to move from asynchronous to synchronous quickly whenever you need to. In order to have this kind of communication, we need to have really good Wi-Fi. One of the quotes in the interviews that I did was from a physicist, Martin Koopman, and he said, bandwidth is like oxygen. It should always be in plentiful supply. It is one of the critical pillars for remote working, and that is true. So I know that it seems like a really simple thing, but we've all experienced bad Wi-Fi connections with teammates all over the place. This is not the place to save money. You want to spend and get the best Wi-Fi that you can if you're going to be working remote. When I interviewed Envato, they're a company that's based in Australia. Their company is actually founded by digital nomads, and they encourage all of their employees to work from anywhere 3 months of the year. At least they did before COVID. COVID changes everything, right? The caveat, though, for them doing that was they had to have a minimum upload and download speed of 20 megabits per second, or they were considered on vacation. So you can go anywhere you want for 3 months, but you have to have the right internet connection, otherwise you're really on vacation. So that's how serious this company took it. And then on top of internet, we need to improve our infrastructure. As you saw in the polls that we did, most people want a hybrid form of working where sometimes you're in the office, sometimes you're at home. We just need to, we want to be able to choose. But in order to do that, we have to have great hybrid meetings, and those are really difficult, the most difficult. When everybody's remote, it's one thing. When everybody's in person, it's one thing. But when we've got that mix, then it starts to get difficult. So what I encourage companies to do is improve the infrastructure to make it easier for people to talk to each other. So what you're seeing here is this old style conference room, right, with a spider room or the spider phone in the middle of the table, like, hey, Bob, it's Lisette, can you hear me? Like in the remote participants, you know that they're there because you can kind of hear them, but they're like mosquitoes. Like they're just kind of annoying, making noise every once in a while in the room. This is not what we want. What we want is to go something more like this, where the remote participants are present in the room, and they're not just these little teeny tiny boxes at the top of the screen. The other thing that you'll notice about this setup is that the people that are there in person, they're facing the remote people. It's almost like a circle. So it's more inclusive that way, so that everybody's sort of sitting around each other. Now, there are tons of apps and tools out there to make this hybrid collaboration easier. This is the Meeting Owl. It's a 360-degree microphone and camera that will auto-focus on the person that's speaking and show everything, everybody in the room at the very top there. So that's just one of the tools, but there's many more out there. And I would say really invest in your infrastructure here, because indeed the keys are, we want to reduce the number of meetings that we need and improve the meetings that we have. Now, the last thing I'm going to say about this is that I really encourage people to train your team. Like I said before, remote is a new medium, and the devil is in the details. It's not, as we've all learned, it's not pajamas and umbrella drinks. I wish it was, but there are a whole bunch of different nuances to working successfully. So one, train your team and give one-on-one support to each other. I learned this when I interviewed NASA. They assign support staff to every scientist one-on-one to help people, because sometimes we're too embarrassed to admit that we don't know how to use a tool that everybody else seems to know how to use, or maybe we don't know how to thread conversations, whatever it is. We want to give one-on-one support to each other. Okay, so we have now defined normal behavior. We've modified how we communicate by going more asynchronous. And now I want to touch on how can we be more present? What are some of those new ways? What does it mean to be present in the modern day workforce? The very first thing I always tell people is turn the camera on. I know people hate it. I know I hear it. And I don't think it's appropriate, of course, in every single situation, but just turning the camera on undeniably adds to the remote working experience, and not only for video calls, but also just for the work experience for remote teams. So some might think it's overkill, but most people that I talk to say that it really helps the conversation, especially if it's multilingual. It helps you to read the lips of other people. So another aspect is we don't always need to do video asynchronous. We can send video messages to each other. That's also a really effective way. I give feedback to my web designer and to my colleagues all the time via Loom videos. Works way better than emails in many instances. Then there, of course, are the group chat channels. That's a clear one. Everybody's got that now, whether you're using Slack or Teams or whatever it is that you're using. It's just sort of that way of having lightweight conversation. So I won't dive too much into that. We are going to now go a little bit, starting to go a little bit out into the weird, but I'll introduce virtual co-working. Same thing as physical co-working, except that you meet online. There are now lots of different apps where you can find a collaboration partner. So for example, FocusMate, it allows you to, you sign up and you get paired with a random person in the world, and you basically both decide, okay, here's what we're gonna do this hour, and then you do the work, and then you check in with each other at the end of the hour to just sort of have an accountability partner to work with you. And there are lots of teams that are experimenting with various aspects of video collaboration. So this is a terrible picture, but it does, what it is it's two teams, both located in Germany, and one team is in one office, the other team's in the other office, and they're both connected by these video screens. So they've got the video and the sound on during the day to simulate what it's like to be in the office together. And then what you see here on this side, this is their board, their Trello board, or they've got some sort of Kanban board up there that they're using to track tasks. So that's how they stay connected with each other during the day. I went last year to Australia, and I visited this real estate company there when they have hundreds of people in their Australia office and hundreds in their China office. And what they've done is they've set up these screens all over both offices so that now you can accidentally bump into your colleague in China when you're walking through the halls of Melbourne. So they've also got these little hangout areas where people can hang out and play video games together, and they do their daily stand-ups here. And this is just how they keep both offices connected, is they've just got these like 50 screens all over the offices in both. So that's a very creative way. It works for them. And then there are virtual offices that are designed for just going to work online. So Coco is one of the more widely used ones, but there are many, many more on the market now. Walkabout Workplace and Remo, and there's about 10 more that are on the market right now. But basically what happens is you log in and you can see where all of your colleagues are on the virtual floor plan. You can move yourself from room to room, but you can only hear the people are in the same room from you. So this really simulates what it's like to be at work with other people all day. So you just have this virtual office open during the day when you're there. And it makes it super easy to just like go down the virtual hall, ask somebody a question, and go back to your office. And then there are telepresence robots where you can project your presence into a different location using a robot. So in this instance, it's this is the Suitable Technologies robot. You beam in just like on Zoom or Skype, and then you move yourself around using the arrow keys on your keyboard. So 50% of the Suitable Technologies office is there in the flesh, and 50% beam in via robot. So they have a 50-50 split in their office. So it depends on your scenario. I'm not saying that this is the tool for you. I'm just introducing you to what teams are experimenting with to create presence for themselves. And then let's take one more step out into the weird and just introducing virtual reality. Virtual reality has been in existence for decades and widely used in small circles, and just recently becoming more and more used in the remote working world. I attended my first meeting in virtual reality about 3 weeks ago, and my mind was blown. It was one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had in terms of meeting with people online. It was visceral. It had, I could hear who was to my right and who was to my left. I pulled up my virtual YouTube. I pulled up my keyboard and a virtual YouTube screen and let people watch videos. I mean, it was incredible. So this is definitely something that's happening. There's all kinds of tools for this. There's Meet in VR. This one's Roomy. I mean, there's about 10, 20 of these on the market right now. But basically, people go into virtual reality for their meetings so that they can be together as a team, and then they usually work, in real reality outside of the virtual world for that. And then one step further, I promise this is the last step into the weird, but holograms are right around the corner. And there's been a lot of experimentation with this in the music world. We've seen they're trying to bring back Amy Winehouse. If you've seen the footage from Snoop Dogg and Tupac at Coachella almost 15 years ago now. So this has been around for a while, but it's now becoming a lot cheaper, and as bandwidth increases, the possibilities are increasing. So just noting that these are the things coming down the pipeline. So we started with defining normal behavior. We talked about how we modify, how we communicate together, and then we just explored what are some of the new ways of being present with each other? And then there's just one more thing I want to add to this. And then I said in the beginning, the future of work is choice. And I really, really believe it. But it turns out that choice is surprisingly hard. And when I said that there's no one right way, it's true. There's no one right way. And that's both awesome and horrible. So in the past, a lot of people or a lot of managers did not want to allow people to go remote because they were afraid that the work wouldn't get done. And what we've known for years, but what COVID has hit home for everybody, is that people tend to overwork rather than underwork. And it is surprisingly hard to keep our own boundaries when work and life are blending so much. So it's, it's all these benefits like, yeah, working from home or anywhere is so great, but I really have to admit that it's great and horrible at the same time, just because it is really hard to keep our own boundaries. So we can set them. I have a boundary of like, okay, I'm not going to check Twitter after 9 p.m. and I have to start over every week on that boundary. So it's just one of those things. So while there's no one right way, and while it can be surprisingly hard, when we get it right, the payoff is huge, right? We as individuals get the freedom to work when and where we are most productive, and companies get a stronger and more connected workforce where location is not the only variable holding us together. And I think that now is really the time to set people up to succeed in this remote workforce, because it looks like normal is really far for us right now. There is no new normal at the moment. So I want to leave people with some resources. So I'll send you on my website on collaborationsuperpowers.com/superkit. I've got a kit of resources that you can download for free. It includes icebreakers and team agreement templates and time zone tips and all kinds of things. So you can go ahead and get that. You can get a discount if you use the code WTA30. You can get I can't remember what the discount is. My editors gave this to me, but you can get a discount on the book. And then, of course, I always recommend people to train your team. It's not slippers and umbrella drinks. There's a lot more to it. So I will go ahead and and end there.
Thank you, Lisette. And during the talk, there was loads of conversation in the chat, answering back when you were talking about the tools. The conversation was going backwards and forwards, and people were sharing the tools with each other. So it was brilliant. I was watching. No burning questions.
But let me just say about the tools. I'm a tool junkie, and I get really excited about the tools, like really too excited and I think what comes across is then it becomes about the tool. But let me just remind everybody, it's not about the tool. It is about the behavior that the tool enables. So really, if the tools are exciting because they're shiny and they're fun, like this tool, I'm so in love with it. I think it makes presenting information so much better. But what you really want to evaluate is what is the behavior that you're trying to enable, and then find the tool that helps you do that. Okay.
Thank you. It was great. The tools and the tips that you gave us to enable us to have better meetings, shorter meetings, and be more productive in this virtual environment. The floor is open for questions. Anyone that wants to ask a question, please do raise your hand. I will try to keep tabs on it, and I will unmute you as you raise your hand, okay? Please do so if you have any questions to ask.
Okay, not everybody at once, huh?
There is a question on the chat.
Okay.
So the question on the chat is, how do you personally do the interviews? Do you use any tool?
I only use Zoom and then some professional podcasting equipment, of course, like a good microphone and a pop filter, all the normal stuff that you would use for that. But I use Zoom, and I know that the sound quality isn't like the best for podcasts. But for me, what I really like is I want to see the person that I'm talking to. And I think it makes for a better conversation. They can see me nodding and making gestures. And so I use Zoom just simply because I like to see the people that I'm talking to. And then we have a video recording. So people that like to watch the interviews via video. My graphic designer likes to see the video. So
there is loads of congratulations to you. Some saying best remote working session I had since the lockdown.
Oh.
There is another question. Can we use some of the tools for remote education?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in remote education, that's for sure. I mean, we give trainings and we're educating, but in terms of like homeschooling and these kind of things, I would say the thing that we need to get better at is how do we engage people better online, which is why I'm experimenting with the app, with the video. So because I think it makes it better than just sharing your screen. But yeah, I'm not an expert in online education, but I did work with an academic life coach for almost 10 years. She was my virtual co-working partner for 10 years. We met for the first time actually in January, and it was awesome. The only thing was that she was way shorter than I imagined, but she's still, we've known each other for 10 years and have never met. But she does online education, and what she does is the biggest thing for her is to mix the mediums, use a combination of virtual and paper. So what she has is like a whiteboard that she'll hold up and she'll write on it. Or like Neri, you saw that she had the flip chart in the background. So using a combination of virtual and physical tools will engage different parts of the brain. So that's my biggest tip for that.
So you have,
and don't make it so long. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, you do have a raised hand. Benjamin, I will ask you to unmute.
There you go. Hello.
Hello.
I was interested, I often work with teams from various countries, and I do see different cultural acceptance of things like webcam, etc. And I'm just interested, have you found any differences since everyone's been remote working, perhaps in the last 6 months or so? Have you found much changes, or what have you found as you go to teams in different countries and those kind of cultural impacts?
To be honest, I see that there's hesitation in using video worldwide. I haven't noticed it in any particular cultures, but that could just be me not noticing. I haven't worked with every single culture since COVID hit either. But I see it as worldwide. People hesitate. I did a conference in Japan virtually this weekend, and they were saying like, oh, but we want to have our makeup done well. And I was like, oh man, I've never even worn makeup. I can't relate. I can't relate at all. But so I think that there is, you know, there's a lot of reasons why people don't like it. And I never force it. But I would say that, you know, for meetings, turn it on for 5 minutes in the beginning so that people can at least say hello, and then maybe 5 minutes at the end to say goodbye. And then if you really need to turn it off during the meeting, that's fine. You know, I give people the choice, but I really encourage it, at least for a small amount of time, just for a bit of connection. Mm-hmm. Just a bit. It's not appropriate for every meeting. It should never be an obligation, but people have genuine reasons for being uncomfortable with it. And then letting people know that you can hide your self view. So there's a lot of people that don't like video because they don't like seeing themselves. So there's like 20% of the people where you can teach them how to hide their self view, and that already takes care of 20%. So we'll get there. I think video is going to be more and more natural as we go along, but again, it's choice. Choice is the key. Freedom and choice are the key words.
Thank you.
Okay, there was some questions in the chat about where can we get this. There was someone answering with the link. There is collaborationsuperpowers.com super kit, and people saying they love the cards.
Yeah, the cards are on the website too, and the super kit includes like a PDF printout, so you can print out the 8 most popular ones. Oh yeah, Mayur, for 10 bonus points for Mayur for having them. So yeah, so you can print out your own cards.
Have another question, Diego?
Yeah, hi all. Hi, Lisette. So I was wondering if you have noticed any impact on Scrum practices on going remote, for example, like on meetings or on sprint duration, something like that.
To be honest, I haven't. I haven't dived specifically into Scrum practices or any of the other Agile practices. To me, it really more goes into just making meetings more efficient and really breaking out the asynchronous and synchronous, so that it seems like it applies across the board, whether it's Scrum or whether it's just people doing non-Agile practices. So just making sure we don't have too many meetings online and really brainstorming with the team. There's this fun game show. I'm really into comedians, so I watch a lot of comedians, and there's a game show called Hypothetical, and it features James Acaster. I'm a big fan. And but on Hypothetical, you know, they say like, okay, you've got a hypothetical question, so you have to take a picture with Nicolas Cage within 24 hours or you're gonna die. How do you do it? And I would say the same thing with Scrum practices, like go to your team and say, okay, you have to take your meetings asynchronous next week. How do you do it? And then just have a brainstorm over, not that you have to do it, but just brainstorm, how would you do it if you had to? And then see what emerges from that. It's a fun exercise, and it's not very confronting, I think.
You have another question from John Barrett. I will unmute yourself.
Hi, Lisette. Very interesting talk. Thank you for that. One of the things that I've found with working with remote teams is building relationships and being much more intentional with building relationships. And that seems to be a bit of a concern if you're moving us more to asynchronous communication, because normally I build relationships through synchronous communication. So I was wondering, how do you counteract that? Because I understand the Zoom fatigue and all those things, and it's this balance. I wondered if you had any tips for us.
Yeah, it's really hard. So with team building, I always say you want to build it into your everyday activities. So icebreakers in your meetings, you know, your silly chat channels for pets, and you know, and having those things. But the other thing that I would say for building relationships is check in with people one-on-one. And I know it's like extra meetings, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a scheduled thing, but really just checking in and making sure that people are okay. So if you're leading a team as a manager, I would say do those one-on-one calls, like just call people, just call them on the phone and say, how are you? Is there anything I can do? For team building, I don't think that there's not a formula for that, but I really believe that connection happens when we pay attention to each other. So whatever that looks like for you, whatever's natural for you, like for me, making phone calls would be really hard, but I say it because I had a boss 10 years ago who lived in California and I was in the Netherlands, and he would call me every morning on his way to work. And in the beginning I was like, hey, what do you need, boss? Like, what's going on? And he's like, oh, just calling to say hi, just to see how your day's been going. Do you need anything from me? And some days it would be nothing, and some days we'd have a 20-minute conversation. And we are still friends to this day. When I went to San Francisco to visit my family this last January, he was one of the people I visited. And it was because of those one-on-one calls. So with team building, really, there's nothing better than being in person. And every remote team should get together occasionally in person and, have a big plate of nachos together and a beer. But in between those times, just paying attention to each other. And I would say in the COVID times, man, it's never been more needed. Everybody is struggling, I think. Some of us are struggling in more luxurious conditions than others, but it's hard for everybody. There's a real stress out there. And I'm seeing it from organizations too. Organizations are now not contacting me to learn how to work remote. They're contacting me to get tips for their well-being of their employees because they're seeing that everybody's overworking. So that's a weird trend that I didn't expect. Oh, and that's a really good point that Kathleen makes in the chat, is to understand what the different kinds of connections are for people. Because some people would hate a phone call, but they would like something else. So as a leader, really figuring that out.
And we have a couple more minutes for the last question.
Or we could just take a break.
Or we can just take a break.
All right, if you have more questions, please just email me and I will try to get back. I'll probably just do a video recording instead of an email to send it back. But if you have other things you want to know about, please be in touch. And give me a little time. I'm getting hundreds of messages a day at the moment, but I have an assistant who's helping me, so.